We will be starting another George Webb book today, Chasing LISK, Long Island Serial Killer. P.S. It was Epstein's Brookhaven op. Learn who is really behind the Long Island killings, not a serial killer. And we will begin. In April of 2017, author George Webb paused from investigating the Awan spy ring in U.S. Congress to investigate the Long Island serial killer murders. Preface. Hot on the Awan spy ring trail in Canada, diverted to Long Island. The only thing citizen journalist George Webb knew about Long Island before April 2017 was the book The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which depicted a bootlegger prescribing alcohol prescriptions from a chain of drugstores across the country and then throwing outrageous parties on Long Island Sound with overflowing money. Here's our author. Another 6'8" legend. Journalist George Webb had visited 12 safe houses and about the same number of businesses associated with Imran Awan's spy ring in U.S. Congress and the Pakistani intelligence service safe houses in the Toronto area, and then he moved to Montreal. Webb stopped in New York to do interviews before continuing his investigation of the Awan spy ring in Virginia. Webb was diverted to Long Island to New York for a week at this time, interrupting these plans. WikiLeaks, another screenshot article. FBI arrests Virginia man said on Pakistani spy payroll. From whom? This is an email WikiLeaks got a hold of. From whom Aberdeen to Hillary Clinton. Date 2011 07/18 5:02 a.m. FBI arrests Virginia man said on Pakistani spy payroll, AP. Unclassified U.S. Department of State case number F2014-20439, doc number C05784109, date 9/30/2015. Release in full. Huma Abedin. From Huma Abedin, sent Tuesday, July 19th. Subject: forward FBI arrest Virginia man on Pakistani spy payroll. From News Ops News Ticker. I'll just here's the email. Pause it, read it, and weep. Journalist George Webb has been chasing the Pakistani spy ring mentioned in WikiLeaks frequently between Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin. Webb was tracing connections to Canadian border safe houses that served as way stations for Pakistani intelligence. George Webb toured Canada with a Canadian filmmaker who lived in Pakistan and had suspicions about her Pakistani fiancé, who gained a U.S. passport through a film school asylum loophole. Webb had begun making daily video updates of his investigations beginning in September of 2016. Vancouver, BC-based photographer made a chronicle of Webb's investigations in Canada. Her filmmaker friend accompanied George Webb on Canadian investigations. I gotta check that out. The YouTube channel is Character Driven. Intro into George Webb on Character Driven. Investigator George Webb found that Hillary's Pakistani intelligence operative in Virginia had their start in Canada at about 20 different Toronto and Montreal locations. Many YouTube publishers followed the George Webb investigations of the Awan spy ring in Congress from 2017 to 2020. George Webb was initially surprised at the level of interest in Canada of the Awan spy ring in U.S. Congress. After the Canadian beginnings of the Awan network became clear, even more interest in Canada developed. Fortunately, many of the George Webb transcripts have been preserved by an ex-Canadian Canada resident, Connie Bevan, on her Patreon site. And if you want to see her Patreon site, it is CONNIE, last name BEVAN. Transcript of George Webb's investigations into the Awan spy ring in Canada and Michigan also exist on various Reddit blogs on the internet. In addition to transcripts, several radio interviews of George Webb investigations into the Awan spy ring in U.S. Congress still exist on the internet. Of the 4,000 on-site video citizen journalists George Webb made from 2016 to 2020, only about 400 were backed up when YouTube destroyed his channel in May of 2020. Some videos and transcripts are preserved on other websites. Here's YouTube saying, "Oh, hey, we're gonna nuke your channel." For the week of Easter 2017, George Webb investigated the death sites of Long Island serial killer, or LISK. So I just wanted to say what people might not remember when I went to Saylorsburg. I went right up to the over the hill. I went with the gal from Long Island who was looking to try to solve a couple of murders of her friends on Long Island in West Islip, ISLIP, and right up to the AK-47s, right up to looking at well-dressed Turkish intelligence guys with AK-47s, and we stayed there 2 days, and we watched and we talked to the people who were at that Saylorsburg. And I had several people that lived around the neighborhood telling me about these helicopters flying back and forth at night, and the road being shut down and having major heavy equipment being brought into, again, a Muslim center run by this guy named Gulen, Fathallah Gulen. We went to his show. We went to his. How does he fund it? We went to the Backdoor Pain Clinic network that was being run by Mustafa Awan. Again, we go to his clinic, right to his door. Mustafa Awan, closely tied with Imran Awan, and that was his key number 2 guy. George Webb was accompanied with a young woman on Long Island, then to Pennsylvania trip. Webb and his Long Island friend visited Fathallah Gulen's compound in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania. Webb had connected to Imran Awan through Gulen's second-in-command, Mustafa Awan. Webb believes this compound is a weapons cache, and he believed Muzaffar was key in placing Pakistani doctors into the United States. Investigator George Webb focused on the Awan brothers and the U.S. Congress curious association with pharma animals for the USDA. Webb speculated that bioweapons could be tested with a proxy like Pakistani Intelligence Unit 111. Webb also focused on Medicare fraud the Awans were connected with, testing the new novel compounds on unwitting patients in the Michigan area. If you guys want to pause it, check it out. Chapter 1. Montreal to Fort Drum. I had just visited the port of Montreal, where the Awan spy ring in the U.S. Congress supposedly had a meet point. I was chasing the Awan ring in Montreal because the Pakistani Intelligence Service, or PAC-ISI, was supposedly diverting NATO weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This gives weapons to the enemy strategy was supposedly CIA Director David Petraeus' brilliant idea. So my last stop in Canada, I visited the port and stopped to eat at the Green Spot Cafe. This place was supposed to be the Awan network meet point for NATO weapons going overseas. Well, the Green Spot Cafe was very close to the point of Montreal, but that was about all I found out. Green Spot Cafe was the supposed meet point for a Canadian drugs weapon operation run by the Awan spy ring in Canada. Just a little more artsy pictures. He's going for a different vibe of the book, I suppose. I was hungry after practicing my very bad French after speaking with the dock workers at the point of Montreal, and I was anxious to return to the United States. My next stop on my Awan spy ring chase was Fort Drum, New York, home of the 10th Mountain Division and the reputed den of iniquity for David Petraeus' CIA machinations. The CIA's National Clandestine Service was reputedly moving Awan network operatives into the United States over this St. Lawrence Seaway Bridge for training operations in electronics, sniper warfare, and compromise operations. The filmmaker in Canada that I was traveling with some insights about the possible Pakistani intelligence operatives may be up to with compromise operations. Her Pakistani fiancé had been very involved in event marketing, traveling in sort of a pack of Pakistani young men going to events around the world. I had followed a story when I lived in Princeton, New Jersey, about David Petraeus' recruiting young military men and women at the Haas School compromise operations of Princeton professions in nuclear engineering and other key warfare technologies. John Nash, a beautiful mind, movie fame, was still a resident of Princeton at the time I was there in 2002, and Nash was supposedly used to put his name on military important technology. Game theory, for which Nash won the Nobel Prize, was stolen military technology used in nuclear arms negotiation. Or so the scuttlebutt around Princeton pubs would have it. And here is a picture with some tiny text under it. Nash's life was dramatized in the 2001 film A Beautiful Mind, which centered on his influential work in game theory. The subject of his 1950 Princeton doctoral thesis, the work earned Nash the 1994 Nobel Prize in Economics. Nash is pictured above at the 1994 press conference following his receipt of the Nobel Prize. Seated next to Nash is the late Princeton mathematics professor Harold Kuhn, a lifelong friend of Nash, who was central to having Nash's work recognized by the Nobel Prize Committee. Petraeus had run compromise operations which required recruiting and then drugging young prostitutes and then have the young men gathered there engage in running train on the prostitute victim. The CIA latter would standardize these operations material in a kit called Operation Underground Railroad. Oh dear. If anybody's following my Kathy O'Brien reading, Railroad. For the compromise operations, these gang rape proceedings were secretly filmed, so the entire future career of the scientist or diplomat would be compromised for life. The Epstein algorithm. Ex-CIA Director David Petraeus has had a long history with Henry Kissinger, KKNR. I was specifically looking at the Haas School and the role of the future head of the Saudi Arabian intelligence, Turki al-Faisal. By running compromise operations through a foreign intelligence service, the CIA's clandestine service could distance themselves from the compromise operations. Turki al-Faisal, head of Saudi intelligence, was suspected by journalist George Webb of running compromise operations for CIA Director David Petraeus and George H.W. Bush. I wasn't sure if the CIA's National Clandestine Service or the DIA's Defense Intelligence Agency, National Clandestine Services, was now in charge of running these operations in the U.S. But I was operating on the rumor that General David Petraeus of the CIA had General Mike Flynn reestablish the National Clandestine Service at the DIA to recruit most of the operatives in the U.S. for compromise operations, mainly using the Pakistani Intelligence Service for Middle Eastern operations and the Ukrainian Intelligence Service for Eastern European operations. I want to immediately add this rumor was completely unsubstantiated. I was trying to find people who knew the story if PAC-ISI was running the compromise operations or not, and if the CIA's or CIA's National Clandestine Services were giving the orders or not for U.S. domestic operations. The CIA could compartmentalize and build on top of the DIA's informant and operative recruiting program. So the Defense Intelligence Service could be the completely innocent party of these operations. DIA. CIA's National Clandestine Services. George Webb believed this division of the CIA worked with the Awan spying for drugs, for weapons operations. Here's their patch. The Defense Intelligence Agency, National Clandestine Services, was supposedly recruited by General Michael Flynn under the Obama administration. Here's another one of their patches. Supposedly, General David Petraeus had created an Afghan-Pakistan Center of Excellence at the Special Forces Command in Tampa, SOCOM, to train operatives, Pakistani and intel operatives to sell weapons to Muslim terrorist groups to track their movements. Hidden Internet of Things transmitters in weapons would connect to bugs that had been placed on Muslim terrorist vehicles after the weapons had been smuggled into terrorist areas. Supposedly, the outfitting of these hidden transmitters was occurring at Fort Drum, and then weapons were floated down the river for final transatlantic shipment from a NATO warehouse near the Point of Montreal. I know how we track our enemies. We give them weapons. Yes. Here's a military aerospace electronics article. DARPA eyes photonic integrated circuits for non-GPS position navigation and timing, PNT. Excuse me. Arlington, Virginia. U.S. military researchers are asking industry to develop relatively simple portable photonic integrated circuits, PICs, for high-performance position navigation and timing PNT devices as an alternative to the global positioning system, GPS, and when GPS signals are not available. DARPA was working on hidden transmitters in refurbished weapons given to the enemy. The idea of tracking weapons of the enemy is a good thing, I guess, but the problem was that the Awan spying was rumored to be bringing in drugs to pay for the weapons that had been recovered from the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those drugs were deadly, killing thousands each month in the U.S. through overdoses. And of course, the very nasty rumor persisted that PAC-ISI was running these compromise operations, and sometimes PAC-ISI recruited local American women who died in the process of these operations, especially if they talked after they had been gang raped. Henry Kissinger had long been involved in these schemes since the Vietnam War, and I was under the impression that General David Petraeus was acting as the CIA soldier boy for Kissinger to concoct these drugs, weapons, and compromise operation schemes. Petraeus's 10th Mountain Division seemed to have a history of these operations all the way back to Black Hawk Down in Somalia in 1993. Here's our epic snake in the grass. Mr. Kissinger, beware of the hats. Henry Kissinger states General David Petraeus is a great man. Of course. So I had someone near Fort Drum and the Canadian border who said they could tell me more. I checked into a hotel near Fort Drum hoping to meet the contact in the parking lot. The hotel was almost completely empty when I checked in almost at 10 p.m. As soon as I had unpacked my bags, a construction crew of about 8 or 9 checked into all the rooms around me. They started partying and yelling, playing music the minute they got in their rooms. All I could think was that these CIA boys in construction outfits were there to disrupt me and my meeting with the guy who had the juice on Petraeus, AF PAC Center, and the drugs, weapons, and compromise operations scheme. Perhaps the 10th Mountain was training snipers in the Awan network for the National Clandestine Services in case of a civil insurrection in the United States. Perhaps even unsolved serial murderer mysteries that had gone unsolved were just long-standing compromise operations being run by PAC ISI and their 111th Elite Group inside the United States. In any case, those were the rumors I was chasing down at Fort Drum. I even wondered about the Long Island serial killer case, or LISK for short, was just a long-running PAC ISI operation being run against the Brookhaven National Laboratory. The murders were clustered around the lab for decades. Full disclosure, I visited Portsmouth, New Hampshire Naval Base in 2002. I interviewed a woman there who said she was in a similar operation. She died not long after. She stated the bad stuff happened on the CIA side of the base, meaning the main side of the port, Maine being the state. There was a border dispute that was going on when I was there. The woman felt George H.W. Bush was the dark hand behind the operation. The Teneo. I had met this woman when I was much younger, and I had knew her to be very beautiful, vivacious, outgoing person with no mental issues or hang-ups. I could not imagine what had happened to her when I saw her these many years later. I went to Kennebunckport, Minnesota, just to see where George Bush hung up with absolutely no ill will. I just wanted to check out what she was saying about George H.W. Bush because I couldn't believe the rapid decline of this beautiful woman. It's a wiki of Portsmouth. This article is the U.S. Naval Shipyard near Portsmouth, New Hampshire. U.S. Naval For the U.S. Naval Shipyard, Portsmouth, Virginia, see Norfolk Naval Shipyard. For the Royal Navy Base, Hampshire, England, HMNB, Portsmouth. That evening, at the Fort Drum Hotel, the only program I could seem to get on the cable TV program was about military surveillance with low-light cameras on suspected soldiers that might give up classified information. The program talked about the intermediation program where the target was constantly woken by strange sounds, baby crying, whispering, women asking for help, etc. The show described all these disruption technologies, all these things designed to mess with the target's mind. My reaction was this was not an accident for soldiers staying there. I would later learn these techniques of psychological warfare were all part of a Special Force Psychological Operations Unit out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, or SOLIC, S-O-L-I-C. SOCOM, or Special Operations Command, calls this Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict, or SOLIC, Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict, for short. Supposedly, Solik was Petraeus' favorite thing to point, where he would watch some of the tapes when soldiers finally cracked. If Pakistani ISI was running compromise operations under the Solik banner, I wanted to find out. This program literally appeared to be using beautiful young American women as expendable objects after the compromise operations were complete. Oh, God. Special Operations Low Intensity Warfare involved harassment team targeting suspected security risks. Needless to say, my contact at Fort Drum was probably scared away by all the construction guy noise. The construction guys party had moved out into the parking lot, so I went out to introduce myself to the boys. I asked directions of the boss of the construction crew, and he let me sit in his pickup with him while he charted out my way to a nearby lake on a map. I could tell he was old school, orienteering on maps rather than GPS. Here's a military operations in low intensity conflict, headquarters department of the Army and Air Force. SOLIC has been developed for domestic operations in the United States by the Department of Defense through the National Clandestine Services. And like we have a Constitution or Bill of Rights, it's a figment of your imagination. I got the vibe from this older gentleman that if he was an undercover boss of a disruption crew, something was wrong about targeting me. I got the feeling he felt something about his mission was on to disrupt me about that night wasn't right. He looked at me a lot in the eyes like he was sizing me up. I got that "are you a friend or foe" feeling from his x-ray-like stares. After he showed me how to get to a certain lake I had been to before, he told his crew to go to bed and stay quiet. I will never forget the great feeling of hope that I had that night. If the military was all over the United States in these clandestine roles, we could get through to them with honesty and transparency. Suffice to say, I left Drum with a feeling of optimism and hope that whistleblowers about the Awan Spying in Virginia would come forward if they met me. That would mean I would be knocking on a lot of doors, which I did. But in the end, I was rewarded by a gentleman by the name of Andre Taggart. But first, I have an interview in New York City with a filmmaker, and then an unexpected detour to Long Island to look for Long Island serial killer, LISK for short. Who is Andre Taggart? Former U.S. Marine, rented home from Imran Awan in Lorton, Virginia. Andre had been renting the home with his wife and family. Spoke with George Webb at the Lorton home on Hawkshead Drive after Webb knocked on his door. They discussed Imran Awan, who had told Andre his name was Alex. Andre revealed that he had found a pile of devices in his garage that belonged to Imran. The equipment had government markings. At least 4 Blackberries were among 20 pieces of computer equipment and gear. Those things run $45,000 to $50,000 a piece, too. George Webb believed Andre had said there was a pile of Blackberries, perhaps 20. After discovering the equipment, Andre notified authorities, ONI, FBI, to come collect them. Those phones ran $470,000. Untraceable phones aren't cheap. Chapter 2. George Webb suspected Jeff Epstein for running compromise ops for George H.W. Bush and Bill Barr long before 2017. I would like to make a full disclosure here at the outset before I get into touring the Long Island serial killer death spots. I had a female roommate in 2002 in New York City that worked on the television show The Sopranos, where she played a bada bing girl, the role of a prostitute. We lived on 48th Street in Times Square between 6th Avenue and 7th Avenue, known as Little Brazil. She had a Secret Service boyfriend that was assigned to Bill Clinton's office in Harlem, I believe. Journalist George Webb roomed with one of the Bada Bing girls on the television show The Sopranos in 2002 in New York City. I don't understand why they have to do that when I just literally just read that on the page below. But I guess some people are just reading this as like a picture book or something and reading tiny amounts of text. I'm not sure. I would assume that's the thought process here. I believe she worked at Jeff Epstein's Manhattan parties occasionally as a server in uptown Manhattan, and she would travel on the weekends to Long Island in the summer to work the celebrity wedding circuit in the Hamptons. I was aware of compromise operations that Jeff Epstein was running in Manhattan and in Long Island, New York. I knew Jeff Epstein was doing these compromise operations on the behalf of George H.W. Bush, and I was vaguely aware that Bill Barr was the person working with Epstein to entrap various corporate figures around New York City. Oh yeah, and Bill Barr's father employed Jeff Epstein of some really, really expensive school as a math teacher with no teaching credentials or any math credentials. William Barr said he recused himself from review of prior Epstein case. Here's why. Attorney Bill Barr acted as the handler for Jeff Epstein's compromise operations on behalf of Bill Barr, according to journalist George Webb. I say this because I believe George H.W. Bush had compromising video footage of Bill Clinton and every president after Bill Clinton obtained through the Secret Service. I don't wish to explore this topic further here. I talk about Epstein's compromise activities in my book called The Good Ship Evergreen and Corona Man Cometh. I believe very strongly the journalist Paul Rodriguez of the Washington Times was planning to report the fact that Epstein was working for Barr and George H.W. Bush. Paul had reported on the Franklin scandal and the use of boys from Omaha, Nebraska's Boys Town as sexual bait for compromise operations by George H.W. Bush in Washington, D.C. Journalist Paul Rodriguez has the story that Jeff Epstein did compromise operations on the behalf of Bill Barr and George H.W. Bush. Here's a artsy little photo of him. And if you'd like to pick up some of George Webb books, you can pick them up on Amazon right now. Chapter 3. Why not Long Island serial killings? Why not a compromise operation? I want to make it clear that I was not part of any intelligence service or law enforcement agency when I was in New York City and Princeton, New Jersey in 2002 and 2003, but I did suspect the Long Island serial killer murders from the first time I heard the expression. I had asked people in Oregon who heard about the case. Why not call it the Long Island serial killings? Because no one has any idea if this isn't just a because no one has any idea if this isn't just a recurring compromise operation that recurs every summer on Long Island over a 20-year period. Here's what I know from 2002. I had a female source pretty close to the top officer of the Hells Angels in America. I didn't think Hells Angels was a corporation or had any officers. She said all the drugs in New York City were supplied from another Hells Angels band in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, sort of a French connection in that drugs were coming from Marseille, France. The Coyote Ugly Bar from the movie in the meatpacking district of New York around 4th Street was the clubhouse of the Hells Angels USA. Again, I don't know if this is true or not, but the story goes this is where the girls who had been killed on Long Island had been recruited. No, I did not go to the police. The story sounded too unbelievable. But I may have given this information to Paul Rodriguez of the Washington Post, or someone who was impersonating him. I also may or may not have given him information about Epstein working compromise operations in Manhattan and Long Island for George H.W. Bush, depending on if the information got through to Paul. I had people involved here that I knew personally and didn't want to endanger anyone at the time. My kids were still very young, for instance. The Coyote Ugly Bar in the meatpacking district of New York was supposedly the headquarters of the Hells Angels in America and was not called Coyote Ugly in 2002. I don't understand why he does that. Oh, like the people just flipping through the book, I suppose. I believe many Long Island mansions were involved in this operation at the time, including Paul Manafort's mansion in Watermill, New York. Paul Manafort's house in the Hamptons was used in George H.W. Bush compromise operations. These operations were later moved to the Russian retreat with his Ukrainian assistant Konstantin Kilimenik. I had no desire to resurface the Long Island serial killings story in 2017. I believed Pakistani intelligence had a similar compromise operation on Capitol Hill, but was not run by Jeff Epstein. It was run by Nancy Pelosi as a sort of Ukrainian madam and Oleg Deripaska's entourage as sort of the Russian mansion owner, with Imran Awan and his Pakistani gang acting as pimps, taking degenerates out to strip clubs like Humpty Dumpty Club in Manhattan and the Camelot Club in Washington. Oh dear. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, aide Imran Awan, was known to spend $3,000 a night at Washington, D.C.'s Camelot Club, leading journalist George Webb to believe he was part of a compromise operation. Chapter 4. Getting diverted to Long Island serial killings locations. I never liked the term Long Island serial killer. How does anyone know it's a serial killer? Why couldn't the deaths of young women on Long Island be the unhappy byproduct of women being drugged and gang raped by diplomats from the UN that had been shuttled out to Long Island? Because upon information and belief, that's the operation that I believe Jeff Epstein was running in Manhattan and Long Island. Jeff Epstein worked with Steve Feinberg's DynCorp operation to run compromise operations in Manhattan and Long Island, New York. Here's our snake in the grass. Artsy snake in the grass. In the spring of 2017, I still very much believed that Jeff Epstein was using various foreign intelligence agencies to run compromise operations around U.S. national laboratories in the nuclear and bioweapons areas. I talked about how the Pakistani G4S security services at our national laboratories was just a Pakistani ISI intel operation being led by my Imran Awan spy ring on Capitol Hill. However, I did not believe the Awans ran Steve Feinberg's compromise operation on Long Island for Brookhaven National Laboratory. For this reason, I felt going to Brookhaven Lab was a diversion from my looking into the Awan spy ring. I believe Epstein ran all the compromise ops in New York, and the Awans had all the compromise ops in Maryland and Virginia based on all the metadata that was pouring in. I believed that Jeff Epstein's Manhattan operation was the taste test. Everyone who is super wealthy gets invited to those Manhattan Epstein parties. When the party's cocktail party portion of the evening was over, the help, who were strippers and male models, came out of the kitchen stripped to their underwear, banging pots and pans, saying it was time for dinner. All the offended couples left the party at this time. Upon information and belief, Trump would already have left long before this happened. Jeff Epstein's stone mansion in Upper Manhattan was the taste test for Bill Barr's compromise operations, according to journalist George Webb. Not much to see, but he goes on site. And upon information and belief, the strippers hooked up with guests in various bedrooms around Epstein's stone mansion. Of all these proceedings were supposedly recorded by Steve Feinberg's DynCorp technical specialists. But who knows if that is true? But the real objective of the freebie was to get the target or mark to go out to the mansion on the weekend and pay for the right to do it. The exchange of money seemed to be very important in cash, and this transaction was also filmed. I believe this was the same modus operandi for Paul Manafort's Konstantin Kilimnik. Ukrainian intelligence operative Konstantin Kilimnik took over compromise operations on Long Island and in eastern Maryland for Paul Manafort. I had just finished filming an interview in New York, and I was getting ready to leave for New York. A woman named Jackie, who said she was an actress in Brooklyn, contacted me and said she wanted to meet me. She said she followed my videos on YouTube and that she was a big fan. I like to meet researchers who help in my crowdsource investigations, so I said I would venture out to Long Island where she lived to meet her. George Webb did not believe the Awans had the New York territory for Brookhaven National Laboratory compromise operations. Webb tied Imran Awan's wife, Hina Alvi, to the bioweapons operations at Fort Detrick, Maryland. I met Jackie in a Long Island bar not far from where some of the Long Island killing bodies were found. She was 26 or 27 and I was 57 at the time. She was a very beautiful young woman, and she had indeed starred in a movie shot on the beaches of Long Island where the Long Island killings dead bodies were found. She played a stripper who tries to convince a computer nerd not to kill himself. I remember asking where a woman would get recruited for a party like that, and she responded, in a strip club. I started to reach for my bill, saying I was not interested in that type of relationship. That's when she came over to meet me, threw her arms around me, and kissed me very sensually. I asked her what she wanted, and she let on that she was very interested in the Long Island serial killings. Basically, she was bribing me with sex to cover the story that she was interested in. And I have to admit, the bribe worked for about a week. The bottom line is Jackie may have known one or more of the victims, but she also seemed to have a lot of friends with the New York City police. I just felt like the Suffolk County police were not taking leads and covering things up. When I raised the question of basmati rice burlap bags being used by the Awans to potentially import heroin and then repurposed for the bodies of victims, I got no response. George Webb videos had hundreds of comments on the Bastami rice burlap bags used by the Awans and also possibly Long Island serial killings. And here is YouTube nuking them. Investigative journalist George Webb felt that Suffolk County Police were not interested in solving the crime. I want to read that. Pause the video. Read it. George Webb collected an extensive Trello board notebook of facts on the Awan spy ring and Long Island serial killings, which was brutally hacked in 2017. Our channel pointed out Imran Awan's family members in Pakistan with Batsami Rice Companies and his import documentation to the Port of Baltimore, but the Suffolk County Police did not respond at all. We also pointed out several limousines companies owned by Imran Awan guests at his safe houses, but again, no interest by the Suffolk County Police. One development occurred from our Long Island serial killings investigations, it seemed. A CIA operative from the 1990s was arrested for 2 killings in Long Island in May of 2017 after I left for Washington, D.C. All his addresses had surrounded the Brookhaven National Laboratory, and my research partner and I believed he was a long-time Hell's Angel in the New York area. John Bittelrolf was arrested for 2 1990s Long Island murders right after I left for New York in 2017. My research partner, who I called Task Force, had traced Bittelrolf to Brookhaven National Laboratories. Task Force Jenny Moore believed she had out a spy ring at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory near Tracy, California. Ooh. To this day, I believe my research partner Jenny Moore and I were right. The Long Island serial murders are called serial killer to throw off the true source of the compromise operations at these labs. Perhaps one of the host of young journalists that have contributed their talents to the neighborhood news may solve this case. Here's our Addy ads. Public Intel Officer. I like that. Up-and-coming journalist, citizen journalist, Addy adds. Addy prefers the term Public Intel Officer. And that's it today.